Amazon is one of the biggest tech companies globally today. In fact, I just made another on Amazon like maybe 3, 4 hours ago. So that shows the scale of the company. But like most other businesses, Amazon started small and the founder has adopted some principles that have let it grow into the giant it is. And today we're going to talk about those principles and how you can adopt them to your business so you can grow your business. So this is a Tech Your Business podcast where we break down technology, inform you about the latest in technology to help your business do more, learn more, and earn more. My name is Peter, and today we have a guest episode with Steve Anderson. So, Steve Anderson is the writer of the Bezos Letters, and he would share his research, his wisdom, and everything with us today. So, welcome to the show, Steve.
Peter, thank you for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, okay. So, first of all, can you give us a quick overview of what inspired you to write your book?
Sure. Um, so I'm actually come out of the insurance industry. Been in that industry a very long time, and the last probably 30 years doing consulting on technology for insurance agents here in the U.S. And one of the things that I think you, like many in the tech, understand how technology continues to develop and actually feels like it's getting faster and faster. Because actually, in a lot of cases, it is. And so I started asking the question, is the biggest risk insurance agents face actually not taking enough risk? Which, given that we spend all our time reducing risk, transferring risk, mitigating risk, it was very counterintuitive. Why should we take more risk because of technology? Well, the thought was that because it's developing so fast, companies don't have the time they used to sit back and kind of wait and see, how is this going to
Hmm.
affect us? And so that started me on a research journey looking at companies that had once been very successful and are no longer here, and companies that are successful and continue to be successful, and why? What's the difference between the two? And so that led me to Amazon, and that led me to the shareholder letters that Jeff Bezos wrote. So the first letter was in 1997. The last letter he wrote was in 2020 when he transitioned away from the CEO role. And as I read those letters, I realized there were threads of thoughts and ideas going through those letters. And so that's what intrigued me in terms of, what are those things? And so that's where the 14 principles came out of. These are things that I think Jeff Bezos used to grow Amazon to where it is today that I think can apply to virtually any company. And that doesn't mean you need to be as big as Amazon. But are there principles there that can apply to your business, regardless of the size, startup to growing? So that's that generated the idea for the book, and then yeah, it's had some great success. So that's been gratifying to me.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story on it. So that's after 30 years consulting on tech for insurance agents. And okay, so you went through these letters Jeff Bezos wrote from 97 till 2020. And like you just mentioned, you identified 14 principles from these letters that you believe he used in growing Amazon. So, for the sake of our audience, or for our audience, can you maybe highlight the top three of these principles that you feel are most crucial? Yeah.
Well, I'll try. So I get asked, what are my favorite or what do I think are the best, and I always say that's like asking me which of my grandchildren I love most. So they're all important, but I do think there are some that tend to resonate with others. So let me first say, 14's a lot. I categorized or broke down those 14 into what I call four cycles that I think businesses are going through pretty much all the time. So it's test, build, accelerate, and scale. So Um, in that first test, I think one of the ones that resonates with me a lot is what I call encourage successful failure. Now, what do I mean by that? In order to grow, you need to invent. And in order to invent, you need to experiment. And if you're going to experiment, that means you're going to fail. And Bezos spent a lot of time talking about experimenting, failing, iterating, and moving forward. One of the phrases he uses a lot is what he says is we invent on behalf of the customer. Now, one of the things that I think kind of resonates with me and maybe with other businesses is that failure often is punished, not celebrated, right? As you know, we've got to succeed, so we've got to
Yeah.
be right most of the time. And that is true. And here's what I would say to that. Um, employees aren't afraid of failure, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure. So if you are creating or have created or have a culture in your company where failure is not tolerated, then employees aren't going to try and push and do crazy ideas. And you know, again, what Bezos says is sometimes those crazy ideas are really good, but you got to go through a lot of iteration in order to get there. So,
Yeah.
uh, and I also want to make sure I say, kind of in that same breath, is that Amazon is intolerant of incompetence. So this is not an excuse for not bringing your best. This is a process for being able to invent, like I said. So for me, the process is experimentation leads to invention, which allows innovation. So that's one, and that's in the test cycle. Um, Another one that seems to resonate, and this is in the build cycle. So once you've tested something, now
Mhm.
you're trying to build it. Okay, is it? This seems like it's going to work. Is it? Does it actually resonate with customers? And that principle is called obsess over customers. Um, and Bezos, in the very first letter, 1997, had three main areas that he talked about. One of those areas was we will obsess over customers. And that always, still, when I say that phrase, it intrigues me because obsess is not a word we normally use with customers. Words businesses normally use are we provide customer service, customer journey, customer focus. But when you obsess over customers, it brings it to a different level. And again, a phrase Bezos uses is we understand the customer's wants, needs, and desires so deeply that we can invent on their behalf. And what that means is we can create products, services, platforms they didn't know they needed until they heard about it. So, obsess over customers is a core idea and a core piece of the culture at Amazon, and is again when you think about why do you go on Amazon? Because it's easy, right?
Yeah.
Because it has wide selection. Because prices, while there might not be the absolute lowest, they are typically low pricing. So all of those things are obsessing over customers and building it so customers come back. And I would say that. So that's again one of the principles in the build cycle. And I'm probably going to end up doing four. I'm just warning you. But
That's fine.
excel in the accelerate cycle, so now we've tested, we've built, now we're accelerating the growth. The principle that seems to resonate most with people, or I get most questions about, is generate high velocity decisions. Now, what does that mean? Well, Bezos actually goes into a pretty long description on the decision making process that he built into Amazon. And he describes decisions that business make as two different types, type 1, type 2. Not very creative, but that's okay. He also describes it as doors. So type 1 decisions are one-way doors. Those decisions are really big, you know, huge impact on the company and very consequential. And he said those types of decisions should be made at the highest level in the company. It should be made with as much data and information as you can gather, and probably ends up being more of a gut decision than just a data driven decision. So those are type one. Now, here's what he says the problem is. Most companies, especially as they grow, which is why this is in the accelerate cycle, especially as they grow, they add bureaucracy because now you have more people, you have more layers, right? You have, supervisors, you have managers, you have divisions, you have all these kinds of things, and it takes a lot for a decision to work its way through the organization. And he says the problem with that is that slows down growth. So what's type two? Now, and I will say type one decisions are few and far between. They don't happen very often. Type two decisions, on the other hand, are the common type decisions, the day to day decisions. And he said those decisions are like two-way doors. You walk through it, you make a decision, you walk through the door, you look around and say, this is not what I thought we were doing. I don't think this is right. Well, what can you do? You actually change it. It's easy to change. You pivot, or you just say, no, this was the wrong decision. We're going to stop, and you go back through the door. He said those types of decisions should be made at the lowest level with the competence and skills to make the decision. It should be made with at most 70% of the information you wish you had. To me, that's a really key phrase. Not 70% of the information, but the information you wish you had, which is probably a lower percentage. And then um, you make those decisions understanding that you could be wrong and you could change it later. He said those are the types of decisions that are most common. And actually, if you make those decisions rapidly, that's where growth comes. That's where you keep moving forward. So that's the idea behind the high velocity decisions is you minimize bureaucracy and you accelerate the decision making process. And again, this is an example where each principle stand on its own, but they also work together because that starts alluding back to the first principle we talked about, which is encourage successful failure. So if you make a decision, you move forward, you experiment with it, it's a failure, then you can move back, figure out what you didn't understand and what to change. Okay, so we've talked about um, test, build, accelerate, and scale is the final fourth uh, cycle. And in that cycle, I'm going to talk about the last principle, which is 14, and it's called believe it's always day one. So that principle is a mindset at Amazon. And it originated in the very first letter, 1997, when Bezos said, it's day one for the internet and for Amazon.com if we execute well. So remember, 1997, frankly, most people didn't even think the internet was something. It thought it was a fad. It's, how's it going to affect business? Nobody really understood. So it's day one. And what's I picked up, remember those threads? One of the threads I picked up was that every single letter he wrote subsequent to that first letter, he always ended it with some version of it's still day one, it's always day one. Even in 2019, which I call the pandemic letter, he said, even with the trouble that we've had, it's still day one. And it's that mindset of being a startup. Um, uh, Somebody had said Amazon is the world's largest startup company because they continue to focus on that excitement, that energy that happens when that first day of business when you walk through the door. And again, I think that's a principle that can help, regardless of the size of your business, think about are we still as excited today as we were X, days or months or years ago when we first started?
That's interesting. So I think I like how you went through the different categories. The test where you talked about encouraging successful failure, the build category where you talked about being obsessed over customers, the accelerate category where you talked about generating high velocity decisions, and the scale where you talked about having the day one or startup mindset or mentality. So I think that's those alone out of the 14 would I think they really
And
make
those are only four. Right? Yeah, and and people ask, the shareholder letters, typically they're boring, and that's what intrigued me about what Bezos did, and how he wrote and how he explained. So most shareholder letters are, like I said, boring. They talk about the company and how great it is. Bezos did that, no question, but he also talked a lot about how we do things at Amazon, and I think that's what sets these apart from other shareholder letters and why I was intrigued with them.
that's interesting.
Can,
So
can I say one other? I can I say one other thing on Believe It's Always
yeah,
Day One, because
yes.
I this may help people. So Bezos was at an all hands meeting, a common thing that happened, usually quarterly. Went through where the company is, update to employees, and in this case, there were about a couple thousand employees in the audience. And afterwards, or at the end, he would take questions from employees. And so he had them written down on a card, and he looked down and the next question, and he kind of smiled and he said, "I think I know the answer to this question." And the question was, "Jeff, what does day two look like?" And he said, "I've thought a lot about this." And he said, here's how he responded: "Day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that's why it's always day one."
Day
And
one.
again, back to that original research, when I looked at companies that were once very successful and literally are gone, you could see that sort of progression. And again, it could take a long time, it could take years to go through that process. But once you start down a day two mindset, it's really hard to change that or pull that back.
Interesting. And I think yeah. So just keeping that startup mindset all the time and not getting into that state of irrelevance or day two, like you said. So risk through the things you talked about, the high velocity decisions, the encouraging successful failure, risk seems to be a thing that keeps coming up. And a lot of business owners, especially most of them are in the size of Amazon, they don't have the resources of Amazon. And a lot of them might
Yeah.
feel that taking a lot of risks or too many having too many failures, having too many experiments might tip them over, especially financially or based on their resources. So,
Mhm.
what would you say to address this kind of thoughts?
Well, and that's right. I mean, I understand that, and I would say a couple of things. One is, um, your experiments don't start huge, right? You start
Mm,
small, and low cost, so failure's not very expensive, um, and you do as much as you can to mitigate the risk of the experiment. So, um, so Amazon built some tools to help with that, and one of those tools is originally called the 6 page memo. So, little background on that one. So, 2004, Bezos sent an email to senior leadership at Amazon and said, no longer will PowerPoint, Keynote, any slide oriented presentation be allowed at Amazon. So, nothing. In its place, the person who is called the meeting and is looking for a decision needs to write a memo, literally a physical narrative written out memo explaining the decision. And again, over time, they put some structure around it. So it always started with what's called a future press release. So that they would write a press release for when the product service was released to the public. So they'd had a vision already in place for what this should do and its impact on customers. And they would write that out again, press release, a narrative, FAQ, so frequently asked questions. What are the questions that people in the meeting are going to ask, and what are the answers? So they think through that beforehand. And part of what's really different is that memo is not sent out before the meeting. It literally is printed out physically on a piece of paper. Actually, it's again 6-page max, and handed out at the beginning of the meeting. And people read the memo for the first time together, like study hall. And what Bezos said in explaining this process, he said, executives are busy. They say they're going to read the memo, they don't. And so we're going to carve out the time at the beginning of meetings so literally everybody's on the same page. And what that does is that prevents those questions when you go through a PowerPoint. Well, what about this? Oh, a couple slides, just wait, all of that is gone, right? Because you have everything you need up front. Now, there still may be questions, they may be explanations, all of that type of thing. But that is a really different process. And what it does is it forces people to think through everything that they're going to need or evaluate, okay, here's what we have, here's what we don't have, and what we're going to. So we need more skills, we need more people, whatever it is, they think through beforehand. So now the experiment becomes more focused. And if it fails, they have a document to go back to and say, okay, what didn't we understand about this process, and how can we change or learn more for future decisions? So it's a very interesting iterative process, and it really helps reduce the risk. Now, you're not going to eliminate it, and so that's part of it, but it helps reduce the risk of those experiments.
And actually, that sounds like a really efficient way to run meetings.
Right.
Really,
Well, and
yeah.
Bezos said, people hide behind bullet points in PowerPoint, meaning they haven't thought through. They create all these wonderful little bullet points, but they haven't literally thought through the implications or everything that goes into that when you write things out. And so this is Bezos is a very good writer. He's a good
Hmm.
storyteller. That's part of what's different about his shareholder letters than others. And writing is a key skill at Amazon. In fact, on their employment page, so if you're looking to get a job at Amazon, they are very upfront that writing, you will likely be asked to write something as part of the interview process, because we want to see, can you express your thoughts in a written form? Because when you do that, it forces you to think more deeply about what you're writing about.
Great. Okay, so you mentioned four cycles. That's the test, the build, the accelerate, and the scale. So for a typical business, how is the business able to identify which parts of this cycle they are in and what they should focus on, depending on where they find themselves?
So, a couple thoughts there. One is, a startup business probably, certainly originally, is in the test and build phase, right? So they're just starting. And a business that's been around for a while or grows faster, they may have different parts of the business in different cycles. So if they have different products, they could be in different cycles. And those cycles continue, right? So one of the things that keeps a business successful is not relying on the original idea, but coming up with new products, services, platforms, whatever that looks like. And so you've always got to be going through those cycles and iterating. So it's not a once and done. We go through the cycles. We made it. It's actually, you go through the cycles, you made it. Now, how do we do it all over again? Right. And that's how you stay current. That's how you stay day one,
Day
not day
one.
two.
Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, you can even break it down within your own business. And again, scale applies a little bit here, but even if you've got your big idea that you think customers are going to want, you're testing it, you're growing, you should already be thinking about what's next. And so this is, and I already mentioned this. So in my thinking, the process is experimentation allows you to invent, um, which allows you to innovate. So there's so much focus right now in kind of business on innovation. I think it's missing the invention part. So I actually just wrote an article that said invention is more important than innovation, which is counter to what you hear a lot. I mean, you hear a lot about innovation, companies have to innovate, but in order to innovate, you've got to invent something that the customers want and don't have already.
Okay. Nice. All right. So, um, invention. I'm trying. I'm just digesting that. Actually, invention is
I
more
know
important than
that's just
innovation. Yeah.
it's a different thought than most people.
Okay. So, one thing that people always that we've always seen is that Jeff Bezos, Amazon, he has a really long-term way of thinking about everything, thinking about business and everything.
Mhm.
So, because like I know at the beginning where for a very long time where the company was making no profits or anything and everyone was writing articles on how the company was dying and not dying and all that, but here we are now. So how has that long-term thinking contributed to the success of Amazon? Then apart from that, so how can other businesses apply this kind of mindset to their own business?
Yeah. So that is another principle, and I call it apply long-term thinking. It's in the build cycle, um, and Bezos, literally from a kid, has thought long-term. And let me give you one example. So he graduated high school, valedictorian of his class in Miami, Florida, here in the U.S. And his valedictorian speech was about how he saw the future of manufacturing being sent to space, and then people would be living in space and coming to the earth as the national park to visit. So, um, think about that. I can't, I don't remember how many years ago that was. A long time ago. Really different way of thinking. So that's long. That's an example of long-term thinking. And then he didn't stop there. So in 2001, he started a company called Blue Origin. Started really small, a couple different people. And what he said was, in order to get to space, we need to reduce the cost of getting to space. So we can't spend billions of dollars to send rockets up. We need rockets that are reusable. So he started looking at how can this happen. So he started experimenting. Now again, he had some money to be able to invest in that.
Yeah.
Not a huge amount at that time, but he started small steps. Um, and again, a long-term thinking idea. And because here's the reason behind. He said, when I started Amazon in the late 90s, he said the infrastructure was already in place. I didn't have to build it, meaning the internet was already there. He could build upon the internet, improve it along the way, yes, but he didn't have to invent the internet or a way for people to go online. Credit card processing was already there. People already were using credit cards. Transportation, there was already the United States Postal Service FedEx, UPS that delivered packages. So there was infrastructure there. He said, if we're going to get to space, somebody needs to create the infrastructure to make the cost low enough that, and he said this, a kid in a college dorm room could create a space company. And kind of alluding to Facebook, right, and Mark Zuckerberg and those kinds of things. But his idea was, what I can do now is help create the infrastructure, which he is doing at Blue Origin, right? And again, you could, and Elon Musk is doing it. Kind of those two right now are the ones that are really pioneering this uh, space race. The current version of the space race.
Yeah.
The other the other long-term thinking, and again, some people could argue, yeah, well, Amazon can do that because they have more money. Yeah, maybe. But Project Kuiper is an Amazon project of sending satellites in low Earth orbit to provide internet connection worldwide anywhere. And that they started that project in 2019. Literally earlier this year, they had their first satellites in space. Their proof of concept, it worked the way they thought it would work. And they deorbited, meaning they brought those satellites back down, because that's part of the process. You have a lot of these satellites, they have a short life, so you have to be able to bring them back out of orbit safely. And now they're getting ready to scale. So that's an example of a whole other business. They're testing, they're building. Right now they're in the building. They think they'll be accelerating here soon, um, and could be another AWS. I mean, Amazon has had a really interesting ability to create entirely new businesses, and that's again my idea of inventing and then innovating. So experimenting, inventing, and then innovating.
That's a
So
good
long
one.
term thinking is uh, again is infused throughout how Bezos thinks. Certainly infused in Amazon, and now infused in his other endeavors, certainly Blue Origin.
I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of foresight and vision to actually do that, to actually build when you can't really see where you're going to, or people can't see where you're going to
Right.
really. So,
And frankly, suffering the what's the right word? The naysayers. Why are you
yes.
doing this? You know, it's a billionaire's playground. Why is he doing this? Um, and one of the phrases he uses when kind of describing this is that I really like is, I want to be a good ancestor,
Hmm.
meaning I want to build what I can build now so that future generations don't have to, and can rely on what we've been able to create and invent and take it to a whole different level. But I like that idea. I want to be a good ancestor.
So,
And
yeah.
that's again part of long-term thinking, is thinking about generational impact.
Yeah, I think in business and in life, that makes actually a lot of sense. Doing as much as you can while alive for the next generation.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, for the audience who are business owners and co, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel would be of importance to them from the Bezos letters and co from your book?
Um, so two things come to mind. One is kind of back to obsess over customers. Most businesses think they do a good job at customer service, right? Or taking care of their customers. I would suggest that you look at your customers and their journey dealing with you, and find the points of friction. So, do you even know? And again, talk to a lot of business owners who actually don't really know what their customers have to go through to buy. What are the friction points? I mean, for me, an easy example is, when I go to the doctor. and this it's changing. So a few years ago, when I was going go to the doctor for an appointment, I'd have a clipboard with paper,
Yeah.
right? And I'd have to fill out the same information every time, right? You're laughing. You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. How frustrating is that? You already have this. Why do I have to fill this out again? And then I'm thinking, okay, is this the, did I give the same information? Is it different? Yeah. What's changing is iPads or some device, right? That now is electronic. It already has the information because they did. Now I can verify it, update what's needed, add, whatever additional questions, and then hand it back to them, and they've already got it. That was a friction point. How many friction points do your customers have in your business, and do you even know? So one of the ways to help understand that is what we call here secret shoppers, meaning
Mm.
somebody who doesn't know the business, your business, you ask them, or some companies can do that for you. They literally go through the buying process and take notes. Where are the problems? Where are the friction points? And if you're aware of them, now you can start trying to figure out, how can I fix that? How can I change that? And so that comment's related to the other principle I want to share. It's called make complexity simple. And um, I still remember where that idea came from. So I was in the book, I was writing, I was researching, and I was in my car. I was listening to radio, in National Public Radio talk show type. And one of the drugstore chains here in the United States, the CEO, was talking about Amazon's recent purchase, and this is a few years ago, recent purchase of a pharmacy company, online pharmacy company called
Mm.
PillPack. I won't go into the details, but Amazon was making a move into healthcare and pharmacy. And the CEO was being asked, what do you think of this? And his comment was, I'm not worried about Amazon coming into the pharmacy space because it's more complex than they realize. And I literally remember saying out loud, yeah, but that's what Amazon does. They make complexity simple.
Simple.
So think about buying online. I mean, another example of that is early on, when you bought at Amazon, you had to enter all your information, your shipping information, your credit card information, every time you shopped. They invented one click shopping. So before Amazon, virtually nobody was storing your information in your account. So you just literally had to click to buy. Now, I would argue that certainly helped Amazon, but that click, that button, that process was so unique that Amazon got a patent on it,
Mm.
meaning it was protected. And they licensed that to Apple. So Apple now could, on their website, do one click shopping. Barnes and Noble, a bookstore, here, tried to do it without licensing. Amazon sued them and won, right? So again, all of those ideas, how can you make your experience for your customers as seamless as possible? And the idea there for Amazon was, if it's easy to shop on Amazon, customers will come back. And so, yeah, those are, in my opinion, those are real practical things that any size business can start thinking about and looking into right now to help apply some of those principles.
That's great. So, looking at the friction points in your customer journey, probably getting a secret shopper to go through and take notes. Then, also, I like the second one, making complexity simple. So,
Yep.
okay. So, I think as we get to the end, can you just tell us about yourself, about what you do, and how users how the listeners can reach you. I'm saying users because we're talking about Amazon so long. How the
I'd be
listeners
glad to.
can can reach you, and in case they want to learn about, I know you've mentioned 5 principles so far. So in case they want to learn about the remaining
Yep.
9 principles or get the book, how they can reach
Yep.
you.
So, what I do now, I'm still part of the insurance industry, so I still do some technology consulting there. Obviously, the book is, a big part of what I'm doing,
Yeah.
helping businesses. That really is my goal. And to reach me, really two primary places. So the book website is thebezosletters.com. And you can get some other information there, see a little bit more about the book. Um, and one thing I will say about the book, with that idea of actually helping, at the end of every chapter, there are a series of usually 2 or 3 questions to help you think and go deeper. So my
Mm,
goal is, yes, to give you some information, but also to help you make it practical to your situation. And then social platforms, my primary one is LinkedIn. And so I have a big following there. So you can search typically Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson Bezos Letters. And if you find me, want to connect with me, let me know you listen to the podcast, and I'd be glad to connect with you.
okay, so the BezosLetters.com for the book website and LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, you can search for Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson Bezos Letters and connect. Let him know you listen to the podcast. And thank you so much, Steve, for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing your research and everything from the book.
Peter, thanks for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. So, for the listeners, did you get any value from this episode? If you did, please share it with anybody who you know it would help, who is building a business, growing a business, having challenges in it. Amazon has done it. You can pick from the 14 principles and apply them in your business to grow. And if you want to be the first person to know when we post more helpful content like this for your business, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you see us on you or you hear us on. So there is about today, this is episode 92, and we have an episode a week. So if you listen to 10 episodes a day, you won't be done till we are back with the next episode next week. So enjoy yourself and bye for now.